All right, Doreen, why don't you start us off?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. As a member of the Capital District, New York State Capital District Women Against War, it's my delight and privilege to welcome you to this Valentine's Day program. First of all, we thank you, Greta Zaro, for your invaluable help in making this program possible. Greta is going to provide the technical support and direction as we move forward. We're very indebted to World Beyond War for partnering with us for today's event. Women Against War of the Capital District was founded in 2002. We believe that war is not the answer to conflict and that women can lead the way to developing alternatives to violence. We seek to bring the voices of women, their collective energy, their unique skills to bear on peace and social justice issues. We work to empower women with a commitment to peace, to participate in foreign policy decisions so that the United States addresses conflicts from a peacemaking perspective. Grannies for Peace, one of the projects of Women Against War, brings together older women who care deeply about creating a more peaceful world for all young people. Some of us are actual grannies, and others are women of a certain age who could be grannies and care about using our wisdom and energies to nurture peacemaking. Grannies for Peace is part of a loose national network of Grannies peace efforts, which include Grandmothers Against the War and Raging Grannies. Grannies protest the reliance of the United States on a foreign policy of military and calls on United States commitment to diplomacy, development, and negotiated political settlements to conflicts. Grannies organize vigils, demonstrations, lobbying visits, and educational programs. In the name of Women Against War of the Capital District and Grannies for Peace, I welcome you to this special event called A Valentine for Planet and People, which is a call for a foreign policy based on love. To help feed us and reawaken our commitment to a world free of nuclear weapons and strengthen our capacity to encourage our new administration to be proactive to this end, we've invited Cynthia Lazaroff to speak with us today. Cynthia is a documentary film producer and longtime activist who has spent decades working on issues related to the United States and Russian relationship and nuclear disarmament. Hers is a deeply grounded plea for a reawakening of concern about this. We're going to begin our program this afternoon with a recent YouTube interview with Cynthia, which was conducted by Jody Evans, a co-founder of CODEPINK, who will more thoroughly introduce our speaker, Cynthia. And after the video, Cynthia will join us directly from her home in Hawaii to continue sharing her passion for peace and the imperatives for disarmament and her sense of how we can move forward. There will be an opportunity for questions and a discussion monitored and aided by Greta. We will conclude then, after that discussion, with a heart-wrenching music video produced by Cynthia, titled Mourning Armageddon. Before we begin the video, Greta, I'm going to ask you to give us some guidance for participating in the question and answer part of our program, which will follow the video and Cynthia's presentation. So would you do that now, Greta?
Yeah, just some logistics. So everyone is muted for now. During the Q&A portion towards the end, you can unmute yourself. To do that, you need to raise your hand first, and then we will unmute you, and I mean your virtual Zoom hand. And so to do that, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's different icons, and one of those is reactions. So you can click on reaction and then click raise hand. If you're dialing in on your telephone, you can press *9, and that will also raise your Zoom hand. And if none of this is making sense, you can also use the chat box, which you'll also find on the bottom of your screen if you hit on the chat box, and you can just type your question in there. So we'll also be taking questions, the written questions as well. We can read those off. And finally, if you're still having tech problems, I will be monitoring my email. So you can email me, which is my name, Greta, Greta, at WorldBeyondWar.org. So I will be checking my email and you can let me know. But yeah, that's kind of the logistics. We can repeat that closer to the Q&A as well. So yeah, we can go into the video.
Okay, thanks, Greta.
So now I really want to get to, I'm so excited to have Cynthia on today. Cynthia Lazaroff is the founder of nuclearwakeupcall.earth and Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy. She's an award-winning documentary filmmaker and author of Dawn of a New Armageddon, a personal account of the Hawaii missile scare amidst escalating nuclear dangers. She's also engaged in Track 2 citizen diplomacy and mediation efforts with Russia, and has founded groundbreaking US-Russia exchange initiatives since the early 80s. She's produced films including US-Russia Relations, Quest for Stability, Mourning Armageddon, a music video, and a mini-series including award-winning Hiroshima for Showtime and Cuban Missile Crisis for NBC, and Mother Russia for HBO. So I really want to welcome you, Cynthia, and thank you for being with us today. You know, what's interesting is I want to ask you, how do you accomplish so much? But I know it's really the passion that you have for the planet and life. Because when we first met, you were working on coral reefs and climate change. And now with that same passion and brilliance, you're working to eliminate nuclear weapons. I'd love to know what changed you, what changed your direction?
Well, listen, Jody, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I am so honored to be here for this conversation with you today, and so grateful for all that you and everyone at CODEPINK do every day for peace. For as long as I've known you, you've been lighting that candle for peace, and you are a great inspiration to me and to so many. So thank you so much. So now your question. Yes, I was doing that work, and after the Berlin Wall came down and after the Cold War ended, I had stopped worrying about nuclear war. And that all changed for me in 2017 when I was asked to work on this film. And I'm just going to share my screen now for a moment. Could I get my screen share working? Sorry. Is that something, Angela, you could enable me to screen share? Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. So all that changed for me in 2017 when I was asked to work on a film interviewing the top experts and former officials in the US and Russia on nuclear dangers and the state of relations. And I interviewed dozens of the top experts in both countries, and pretty much everybody I spoke to awakened me to today's staggering nuclear danger. The two people who awakened me the most were our US former Secretary of Defense, William Perry, and former Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Secretary Perry said to me, "Today, we're at a greater risk of a nuclear catastrophe than at any time in history, but most people are blissfully unaware of this danger." And then he said to me, "We are sleepwalking into a nuclear catastrophe, and we must wake up." At that moment, I realized that I'd been sleepwalking since the end of the Cold War. When I came home a few weeks after interviewing Gorbachev here to Hawaii, where I live, to the farm, it was at the height of the fire and fury tensions between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And nuclear tensions were particularly high here in Hawaii because we knew that we had been marked as a target on Pyongyang's map of nuclear death. And we were actually getting instructions from our government on how to prepare for a nuclear attack and how to survive a nuclear attack. So all of this was in my consciousness and awareness on the morning of January 13th, 2018, when we awoke to this hauntingly beautiful sunrise, so haunting and unusual that we photographed it. And just shortly thereafter, as I was sitting in my living room in a conversation, I was one of over 1 million people across the state of Hawaii who got this message on my cell phone: ballistic missile threat, inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. So at first it was, is this real? And this must be a hoax. And so we tried calling 911, but everybody was calling 911. We kept dialing and dialing. Nobody could get through because everybody got a busy signal because everybody was trying at the same time. And at that point, my partner said, well, our girls. And he said, I don't know whether this is real or not, but I'm going to go get the girls. Our girls were 7 miles away in the town of Kapa'a. So he was out the door and I said, wait a second. We need a plan if it is real of where we're going to meet. I don't want to be separated. He said, call me in the car and we'll figure it out. He's gone. I'm standing there dazed. And I think, who do I know? Who's going to know? Who's going to know if this is real or not? And I immediately think of my dear friend, Felicia Cowden, a journalist, who's the first to know anything. And everybody takes her phone call. I started dialing her. I called her. I left a message. I texted her. I checked her Facebook page. Nothing. And after what seemed like an eternity, she called me back and she said, Cynthia, the county is telling us to take shelter. And that was just it. It was like, my God, this is real. I've got to take this seriously. And so the first thing was, well, where do we go? There are no designated nuclear shelters in the state of Hawaii. So we decided, we have a neighbor who has a meditation cave in the cliff. That was the most sealed environment that we would meet there. But then the next thing was, well, what do I take with me? What do I do? And I looked at my phone and it had 12% charge. And I thought, oh my God. So I thought, does the cave have electricity? There are lights in there. Oh, okay. Maybe there's an outlet. So then I took a bag and I started throwing things in it. My phone charger, my computer charger, my purse, my passport, a shawl to wrap around my face in case there was radiation, and then leggings for the same reason. And then I stopped and I thought, wait a second, is there going to be any need for any of this if there's a nuclear attack? And then I thought, I don't know, but I just have to try to survive. And then the next thing was food and water. And I thought, I have done nothing to prepare my family for this. We're supposed to have a gallon of water per day per person for 2 weeks, and enough food for 2 weeks per person, a canned food. And I looked on the shelf and there were 2 small bottles of water. And I threw those in the bag along with a bunch of bananas. And then it was just, I got to get to the cave as fast as I can. I didn't know how many minutes we had. I didn't know if it was 1 minute, 5 minutes. I just didn't know. So as I got into the car, I thought of my daughter in LA. And I hadn't allowed myself to think of her until that moment. And if I had, I probably wouldn't have been able to hold it together. But I started calling her and I thought, I've got to call her to let her know and to say goodbye. And so it was ringing and ringing and ringing and she wasn't picking up. And I parked the car and I started running towards the steps to the cave. And finally, at the foot of the steps to the cave, she picked up. And I said, Mackenzie, I don't know if you've heard or not, but we've all got a message on our cell phones and we're going to shelter in the cave. And I'll call you in from the cave again if I can, but I just want you to know that I love you. And she said, Mom, I love you too. And at that moment, time stopped for me. And I thought, is this the last time I'm ever going to talk with her, to hear her voice? Is this the last connection in this life to her? And then I thought, wait a second, is this not just about her and me, but is this about something much bigger? Is this not just one nuclear weapon from North Korea, but is this many nuclear missiles coming our way? Is from Russia, and are we sending many missiles back there? Is this the beginning of one of those accidental nuclear wars that Secretary Perry and all those experts are so concerned about? Is this the beginning of everything we know and love and cherish on this earth? Is this the beginning of life? Is this the beginning of the end of life as we know it? And at that moment I heard, Mom, go. And she jolted me out of it. And I said, Mackenzie, I love you. And I started running up the hill to the cave. And Just as I got to the door of the cave, it opened and it was my neighbor calling, and she was smiling. She said it was a false alarm. It took 38 minutes for our government to tell us by text message, which my cell phone wasn't working at that point in that place, that it was a false alarm. And even with everything that I knew about nuclear weapons and nuclear fallout and Hiroshima and Nagasaki and nuclear war and nuclear winter and nuclear war was unimaginable to me until I went through those 38 minutes. And now it's inside of me as a mother, as a human being. It's in my gut, and it's a visceral understanding, and it's never going to go away until we eliminate nuclear weapons. And so that's why, Jody, I've pivoted to this work, back to this work. And that's why I'm here today to talk with you all about the nuclear risk with China in this China is not our enemy campaign. So thank you.
Well, that is a very visceral story. And I think, I don't know everyone else, but it's quite frightening to hear. And yes, we're sleepwalking. And I think that woke you up with that experience. And you've now become the tuning fork for the rest of us to wake up. So thank you for that. So, you know, as you look out, what are your concerns as we see this, you know, the hate and lies being driven towards China and this new Cold War building? How do you see this nuclear risk with China?
Well, you know, Jody, I actually am concerned for many reasons as I look at this right now. And so first of all, basically, whenever I see relations between nuclear powers going in this direction and going down, the alarm bells go off, because as relations deteriorate and go down, nuclear risk goes up. And it's a pretty simple equation. You know, it's just what happens. So I think that the first important thing for your campaign, which is just thank you so much for doing this. I learned so much preparing for this because my nuclear relationship lens is through Russia primarily, but we always have to remember that there's a nuclear dimension to the US-China relationship, which people don't often talk about. And even if the probability of a nuclear exchange is low, it's still there and it's possible. As long as we have nuclear weapons, it's possible. And you only need to have one detonation to be catastrophic. So this deterioration in relations, for me, wearing my lens, is existential. And I think we can't forget that in this work. So we have to remember the stakes, always keep our eyes on the stakes. So, and one of my main concerns is that when you have a breakdown in good relations, in engagement, and especially in communication and dialogue, this increases the nuclear risk. So when nuclear armed states stop talking to each other, especially in the context of what we're seeing with the China as enemy rhetoric, the rising tensions, the sanctions, the military buildup on both sides, when this happens, in a moment of crisis, the risk of misunderstanding because of poor communication, the risk of conflict, the risk of war goes up. And if war breaks out, the risk of escalation to the use of nuclear weapons due to blunder, miscalculation, misunderstanding, or mistake also goes up if there isn't good communication. So that's probably one of my greatest concerns. And we've basically seen the same alarming developments with Russia. We've basically stopped talking to Russia about nuclear risk and nuclear cooperation. You stop talking to your nuclear adversaries at your own peril. It's suicidal, omnicidal behavior. It makes the insanity of nuclear weapons even more insane and much more dangerous. So during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we always, pretty much no matter what was going on with relations, had a safe space, an insulated space for arms control and talks on nuclear risk and nuclear risk reduction. That's gone. It's not there with Russia, and it's not there with China, again, at our great peril. We have real differences with both countries. They have grievances against us too. But we have to remember that in the context of the nuclear threat, that we have to create this safe space. We have to we have to keep our eyes on the need to continue to reduce the nuclear risk and to ultimately work towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. And, you know, one of the reasons that Secretary Perry and Gorbachev and others have said that we're at such a greater risk today is because we've stopped talking to each other. We don't have this dialogue, okay? So combined with a breakdown in communication, I'm also very concerned about the risk of a conflict breaking out due to rising tensions in particular locations. And one of the places I'm most concerned about is the South China Sea. And I'm very grateful to Anne Wright for her excellent work in documenting the increases in the US show of force incidents in this area. So this is the second alarm bell or next alarm bell, I would say, that goes off in terms of nuclear risk, is that you see, we have a situation, we have increased military activity in a place where there are already rising tensions. The tensions are very high, and we have poor communications. You put those three things together, and it's a recipe for disaster. And you can only be lucky so many times. We've been lucky. We have the same thing going on in the Bering Strait with Russia. We have the same thing going on in the Baltics with Russia. We can't depend on our luck to last forever. It's just we've been really, really lucky and blessed. My next concern, and this is a big one, we're seeing what we call in mediation a classic action-reaction cycle, and essentially the fueling of a new arms race. As relations have deteriorated over the past 10 or so years, and as the US has been building up its military in the Indo-Pacific, China has been modernizing its nuclear weapons, and it has been increasing its spending on nuclear weapons. And with estimates that they plan to double the number of nuclear weapons in their arsenal in the next 10 years, we've also been modernizing our nuclear weapons and increasing nuclear weapons spending. And so has Russia been doing that. And so essentially we're seeing the fueling of another arms race. Our outgoing president said he was prepared to, quote, accelerate and win an arms race with both Russia and China. And I just have to bring this up because yesterday in the Washington Post, there was an article, the title of which was Defense Bill Offers Biden's Team a New Framework to Counter China. So this new $740 billion Pentagon budget includes $2.2 billion for the first year to fund a new initiative called the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, which, quote, aims to establish a region-wide approach to countering China in its immediate sphere of influence. So it includes, among other things, funding for additional attack submarines that senior Pentagon officials say are vital for countering China's powerful maritime forces, unquote. And also the article ends with saying that there's an expectation that this deterrence initiative will see increased funding over the next few years. So probably doubling in 2022. So this is an arms race, highly destabilizing and highly dangerous.
And highly expensive at the cost of the needs of the people, you know, so not only that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jody, I was just going to say, I have great concerns about the money being spent, as you just said, and not on the other existential threats we face right now, the pandemic, climate change, healthcare, human needs. I mean, it's insane, again, to use the word insane. Also, the more nuclear weapons we have, the more likely something is going to go wrong somewhere. So this is just all going in the wrong direction. My next concern relates.
You brought up the media. You brought up this article, you know, so here we go. This is an article that, you know, describes a reality without a question. The media is being determinant in the way it covers these things instead of questioning. Are you finding any media questioning, or I just find it all cheerleading?
Okay, Jody, you've just touched on something really that gets at the heart of it. And it comes to this question of the role of the media. And I took a walk today. I read this article yesterday, and then I read it again this morning. And I took a walk on the land, and I was thinking about it. And suddenly this thought came to me: did they mention the word nuclear in that article? Did they mention the word nuclear risk? Did they mention how dangerous this is? And I came back and I pasted the article into a Word document and did a search for those words. Not one mention. Not one. It was just stating, as you just said it, stating what was going on without putting it into a context of what this means. What are the implications of this for humanity? You know, what does this mean? And so this actually gets to the next thing we were going to talk about, but it's, I want to just say that during the Cold War, the media, and not all media, but largely, fulfilled its ethical responsibility to keep us informed on the clear and present nuclear danger pretty constantly. They are missing in action on this issue, not across the board. You asked who's doing it. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, I just applaud them. They are doing this on climate and on nuclear day after day. They are publishing amazing articles, and there are others doing it as well, but they are the first ones that come to mind that are doing it. But in terms of mainstream media, you get an occasional article, but most of the information, like what you just said, Jody, is being presented without giving the reader a context, without connecting the dots to what this really means. So because the media is missing in action and not doing their job, it's either because they're sleepwalking or because, and I think part of it is also because we're now in a very different we're in a commercially driven, frenzied millisecond news cycle. That how can they grab your attention for 1 second, get you in the gut, get you to click on the article and read it? How are they going to get you to do that? So, and part of it, could be other reasons as well, the corporate structure of media, mainstream media, et cetera, et cetera. But whatever the reasons are, it's up to us to inform them and inform ourselves. We'll come back to this more, but I just want to touch on one more concern, which I think is really key to this question. And I want to go back to the screen share in just a second. We need to look at where this overall arms race fits in for China with Russia and the US, and how it fits into the overall global picture for nuclear risk and nuclear weapons, and ultimately for the elimination of nuclear weapons, where we have to go for our well-being. So when we're talking about China as our enemy and the nuclear relationship with the United States and nuclear weapons, we can no longer just look bilaterally at the US-China relationship or at any relationship just bilaterally in the nuclear world that we're now living in, which is another reason why it's so dangerous today. During the Cold War, it was largely driven by everybody in either the Soviet camp or the American camp. Now it's a multipolar nuclear world with 9 nuclear armed states. And expert Robert Legvold, in my interview with him, said it, and it's slowly spinning out of control. And so we have to look at the China-US relationship on nuclear weapons with Russia because of actually a number of things, but things that China themselves have said. So I'm just going to go back to the screen share for a moment here. To have a look at this chart. So you can see this is the global nuclear arsenals. The United States has 5,800 nuclear weapons. Russia has 6,375. The next largest nuclear armed state is China, which is 320 nuclear weapons, about 1/20th the size of the US-Russia arsenals. So vast, vast difference. So over the past year or so plus, our outgoing president has said that he wanted to bring China into trilateral discussions on nuclear weapons reductions. And basically, China has said, if the US says that they are ready to come down to the Chinese level, China will be happy to participate the next day. However, we know that's not going to happen. This is Fu Kong, director of arms control in China's foreign ministry, and that China views the US push for trilateral arms control as purely insincere, hypocritical, and hostile against China. So basically, China's invitation is this: you come down to 320 and then we'll start talking. We need to take this invitation seriously. And a nuclear dialogue between and among all nuclear armed states is more important than ever now, but especially between the United States and Russia, we have to take the lead. It's up to us to come down to this level if we're going to make progress toward the elimination of nuclear weapons. And
well, how do we do that, make progress towards the elimination of nuclear weapons?
okay, so Jody, the way forward, the pathway forward is to come down to the level of China. It's existential. And I just want to do a shout out to my colleagues at Global Zero. They have really outlined a very thorough, sound, verifiable pathway to get down to the level of China. And once we're there, to get down to zero nuclear weapons. But this is definitely the way forward. And so this is something that we need to be talking about. We need to make a huge priority, because this is the prayer of getting us to eliminate nuclear weapons. The next step is for us to come down to the level of China. So very quickly, this is the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute chart last year of military spending. I just think it's important to see these numbers. The United States, almost 3 times the amount of China, next highest military spender. Russia, the next highest, which is about 1/3 of China, which is about less than 10% of the United States. And then you can go down from there. But you can see that in the case of the United States and China, military spending went up 5% in 2019, and in the case of Russia, 4.5%. So that's where we are in terms of military spending overall. I thank my friends at ICANN for this chart. Total spending in 2019 on nuclear weapons, almost 73 billion. You can see the United States over half of that. China, the next highest, less than 1/3 of the United States, and then Russia shortly following Great Britain and China. So I'm going to stop sharing right now. Come back. It's where we need to go from here. So we have an interdependent relationship with where we need to go. But the US and Russia have to take the lead, because China, the next highest nuclear power, is not going to play unless we do that. And I would have to just say that even if we use just 1/2 of 1% of the global nuclear arsenals, we have 13,500, right? That means about 67.5, just under 70 nuclear weapons, that it would be a civilization ending event that would be as a result of the billions killed. And then also nuclear winter brought on famine, global famine brought on by nuclear winter. So so when you think about the numbers that we just looked at in the arsenals, and it only takes less than 1/2 of 1% to mean the end of civilization, this is serious. This is devastating information, and it's existential. And to quote my dear friend and mentor in this work, Dan Ellsberg, he says that our chances of surviving this century are very small if we don't dismantle the US-Russia doomsday machine and then take these other steps once that happens. And he says that he doesn't think it's likely we're going to survive given climate and nuclear, but it's not impossible. And he's putting his heart and soul in what's possible, and so am I. But in order to achieve those reductions with Russia and then China, we're going to have to repair the hostility in our relationship, as Secretary Perry says. Because we don't understand the danger, we're not repairing the hostility. We have to repair the hostility. We have to change our relationship to make these reductions possible.
Maureen?
Yes. As you can see, Women Against War through Grannies for Peace was quite struck with this video when we watched it together. And so we decided that we would like to invite Cynthia to join us from Hawaii on this Zoom, the magic of Zoom today. And so we are incredibly grateful. I won't belabor her bio. Both Jody and Doreen have made clear that she comes to us with a rich 3 decades more and more of study and concern about Russia and the Russian people. And the opportunity that that's brought her to speak with experts and to really ponder our international relationships. And it's quite clear that this gut level experience that she had has made so dynamic her concern about nuclear issues. And so she seemed like the perfect person to join us today on Valentine's Day, because she speaks from the heart, and as Grannies, we do too, to the existential issues that so face us as a planet. So it's a true honor for me to be able to introduce Cynthia. And I also want to mention that Cynthia has very graciously compiled a body of information, citations, references to the things she's talking about that will be made available through Greta to all of us when this is over. So if anyone sees a particular thing that they're concerned about following up on, you might put that in the chat. And if that's not in the material that Greta has ready to go, she probably can add it over the next few days. So without belaboring anymore, I am totally honored to be able to invite Cynthia Lazaroff into our homes today. Welcome, Cynthia.
Maureen, thank you for that beautiful introduction, and you, Doreen, and you, Greta, and for all of you at World Beyond War and Grannies for Peace and Women Against War for organizing this event today on Valentine's Day and inviting me to be here with you. It's truly my honor to be here. I want to thank you all for all you do for peace, and for everyone on the call today for joining us on this day, and for all you do for peace, because that's what it's all about. I was very moved to hear you, Doreen, talking about you're about a foreign policy based on love. So today's the perfect day to be with you all on Valentine's Day. And on this day dedicated to love, I want to go back to that moment during the Hawaii false alarm when it became most real for me, the nuclear threat. It was the moment that I called my daughter in LA to say goodbye. And I said, Mackenzie, I love you. For me and hundreds of thousands of us across the Hawaiian Islands, going through those 38 minutes of the Hawaii false alarm was a deeply personal near-death experience. We all called our loved ones to say, I love you and goodbye. And for me, the experience was a nuclear wake-up call, an awakening, a gift that I have felt compelled to share as widely as possible, as a prayer, as an offering, and today as a Valentine. When I got home after those 38 minutes, I was filled with this sense of gratitude. It was this feeling of pinching my cheeks and saying, I'm still here. We're all still here, and we have a chance. And then I heard this voice say, you've got to share this. You've got to write this down, and you need to start right now. And so I started writing, and I wrote over a period of really 8 months. It was like a pregnancy. And I started chronicling moment to moment what it was like to go through those 38 minutes. And as from the perspective of being a mother, a human being, and also as someone who had just been awakened by top nuclear experts in the US and Russia on today's staggering nuclear danger. I'm going to share my screen now. And let's see. So that writing became an article that came out on August 6th, 2018, Hiroshima Day, the anniversary of the day the US attacked Japan and dropped the first atomic bomb. It was my deep honor that they chose that day to publish the article. I was also deeply honored and inspired that this prayer, this offering, was so widely spread around the world and so wonderfully received in Russia, where it was published on the front page of the popular daily Kommersant for an entire weekend in the center, and then by the Gorbachev Foundation and the Russian International Affairs Council. But that I didn't know how the nuclear security community would receive this offering, but they were very, very touched by it and wanted to share it. And so that was really a gift for me. While I was writing the article, there came a moment in the spring where I thought, I can't just leave people in despair. That's not fair, because it was all about the terror of the experience and today's staggering nuclear danger and all the things that I've learned about why we're at a greater risk today than at any time in history. And I realized that I needed to do more than try to offer something to awaken people. I needed to give them a reason to awaken, to act, because those really go hand in hand. Awakening and being paralyzed by fear or despair isn't going to be useful. So I thought, what can I do? And how to do this in a way where we're motivated by love and not fear to act. And so, inspired by recommendations made by Gorbachev and Secretary Perry and other people I interviewed, and many NGOs I've come to know and love and respect in this work, and members of Congress as well, I came up with 10 steps, again, not my steps, but inspired by others. And I created something called the Nuclear Playbook. And that appeared first at the end of the bulletin article. I've updated it many times since then as nuclear policy and nuclear conditions have evolved during these past years. And I'm just going to say a few things about it right now. It is on the website so that you can go deeper and learn more about these steps. Many of you are probably familiar with most of them already, but I'm going to speak about one of them to start, which is number one, which is no first use, which is essentially that we would adopt a policy of no first use, which means that we say that we will never be the first to use nuclear weapons. And we encourage all the nuclear armed states to do this. China and India have a no first use policy. And if this is put in place, it immediately reduces tensions and immediately reduces the likelihood that in the event of a conflict, it would escalate to a nuclear exchange. So this is of great importance to do as what I would call a nuclear risk reduction step. The first 5 steps right now have been adapted, reordered to match those put out by our colleagues at Back from the Brink, which, if those of you who may not know, many of you probably do, it is a national movement, a coalition of organizations, individuals who have come together on a consensus of steps that need to be taken. So this, if you go to their website, you will see these same 5 steps. I'm just going to take you to navigate for 1 second so you can see on the website. You go to the Nuclear Playbook, you open the Nuclear Playbook, and there you see the 10 steps, and everyone has a more detailed summary, plus more information, and where the steps tie into legislation. It links to the pending legislation so you can see who's sponsoring it, what the status is, and there's more information about what you can do. This playbook was designed to both combine what I call steps that need to be taken to immediately reduce the risk of a nuclear catastrophe, along with steps that need to be taken to move us towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. I'm going to come back to number 5 a little bit later, which is essentially the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and also in the NPT treaty, but it's to eliminate nuclear weapons. We'll come back to there in a moment. I want to now go for a second I created 5 more steps in the playbook that really are focused on all nuclear adversaries, but in particular with Russia in mind, because what I've found in this work is that because Russia is so toxic in relations right now with the United States, and things have deteriorated so badly, but many people in the nuclear space don't want to talk about Russia. And we do have, and we can never forget that we together possess over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. So these steps really are designed, we have to keep the dialogue in place, as I mentioned in the China is not our enemy presentation, and take steps that really keep us cooperating, talking, and doing things that we must do together, reducing the risk of terrorism, et cetera, to put our relationship back on track and get us working to reduce our arsenals. That's the absolute next step. There's also a page on our website that is more, for people, what you can actually start doing today. Go back there. For some reason, I have trouble getting a second on my screen. So I just want to take you to this page. And so for people who aren't, you all are doing this already, but for people who aren't engaged in this work, we talk about putting the playbook in the hands of congressional representatives, but really beginning with what you can start doing today. I tell people, you can just educate yourself. It's a constant process of learning, this learning about the nuclear danger and nuclear issues and nuclear policy and what we can do. And people think many times it should be left in the domain of the experts, especially newcomers to this work. And if nuclear weapons can destroy all of us, we all know we all have a role to play. We all have a seat at this table and we all need to claim it. So it's a constant process of learning for me and catalyzing a conversation, talking to everybody you know. You all are already doing this, but this is what I tell newcomers to this work, and then bringing the journalist community into the conversation. I think everybody who's running for Congress should be required to answer the question, what do you know about the nuclear risk and what are you doing about it? I don't think anybody should hold office who can't answer that question. Two places that I go for my learning daily are the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. The coverage is fabulous, as many of you I'm sure already know. But just this past week, I want to mention an article that I read, Why is America Getting a New $100 Billion Nuclear Weapon? This article is still haunting me this morning, and I'm sharing it with people. It's a must read for everyone, what's going on in our nuclear policy. So I just want to do a shout out to my dear colleagues at the Bulletin, and then to say that there's a wonderful, the W.J. Perry Project has really done a lot, so much on education if you go to their website, and they have a podcast that came out last year called At the Brink. I've listened to many of the episodes multiple times, and I'm honored to appear in the first one on nuclear false alarms, but it is a place to really learn. They've so carefully teaching us and constructed this to teach us about the nuclear danger. I now want to come to the treaty, and as most of you know, that it was ratified. It got the 50th ratification in October, and it entered into force last month. A few things about it. It's the first nuclear weapons treaty based on humanitarian, not military law. It's the first to recognize the disproportionate impact of nuclear weapons on women and girls and indigenous peoples. And it's the first to provide compensation to victims of nuclear use, testing, and production. It's the first to challenge the nuclear apartheid, the nuclear colonialism of prevailing global nuclear policy, which essentially legitimizes the possession of nuclear weapons by the Security Council members and holds the rest of the world hostage to the possibility of nuclear war until these 5 countries, including the United States, Russia, Great Britain, China, and France, fulfill the mandate, fulfill their obligation to honor their pledge in the Non-Proliferation Treaty in Article 6 to end the arms race and pursue complete disarmament. It's been more than 50 years since they made this pledge. So big shout out to, and bows of gratitude, deep bows of gratitude to ICANN and all the partner organizations that made this treaty possible. And there are links that Greta has, there are links here as well, but ICANN has on its website so many ways to get involved in bringing the treaty forward, getting your country on board, getting your city on board, getting your lawmakers on board. There are many organizations in the world and in the US. I am mentioning 2 here, the Nuclear Ban US that has many programs focused on the US and Reaching Critical Will, both domestic and international. I am greatly inspired by the divestment aspect of the campaign. That is what many of my colleagues say, the teeth of the treaty, the teeth of what's next for the TPNW. And there is a partner, an ICANN partner called Don't Bang on the Bomb. They really lay out a campaign for divestment, and they lay out in detail about the nuclear weapons producers. They have identified them, 26 largely multinational corporations, the implications for the countries that have ratified the treaty in terms of what's going to happen with these companies, and for all of the rest of us to make a difference is hugely inspiring to me. And one really inspiring just little story is that New York City is in the process of divesting its pension fund from nuclear weapons. So this is the kind of place that all of us can make a difference with the bank, where we bank, and we can just based on divestment played a huge role in the success of, as we know, the apartheid, the anti-apartheid movement, the ban on cluster bombs and munitions, and the ban on landmines. So this is following in that lead, and it has great promise for all of us. Just a few things about nuclearwakeupcall.earth. In addition to the kinds of things that we've been talking about, education, outreach, nuclear risk reduction, been asking the question which we asked during the Cold War in the 1980s, working in citizen diplomacy with Russia: what wants to happen? Listening deeply. What has the capacity to break through? What is the capacity to open hearts, change minds, transform our nuclear legacy? And I am so excited to have started Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy over the past year. This project did not come from my head. It was inspired by 4 young women who didn't know each other, who had never had any experience with nuclear weapons, who had all either read the article I wrote or met me at a talk, and came to me independently of each other, all within the space of 10 days, and said, will you mentor me? And that's how the project was born. I didn't stop to think about it because I was hosting many events that week when this happened with all these people, but I fell and broke my ankle a week later and had to stop. And this all came to me, and I thought I better pay attention. And so we now have we've had 3 of our international mentoring sessions, women from all aspects of the nuclear space, from former officials or current officials to activists, all sharing what they've learned with newcomers, with one another, building consensus within the space. We've had women from over 38 countries involved to date, women from 8 of the 9 nuclear armed states, and the 9th nuclear armed state, North Korea. We've had women who have family who originated in North Korea. So very exciting. Hope to say more about it in the chat, but would love to invite all to be involved in this. Nuclear alert simulations, where we take people through getting a photoshopped image on their cell phone in Moscow or in Washington, going through the experience of what it's like to spend 38 minutes thinking that you're going to be hit by a nuclear missile. Where do you go? Who do you call? What's it like? What do you take with you? And how does it change you? And what can you do about it? Track 2 and track 1.5 diplomacy. That's people to people conversations, and then also conversations between people and current leaders, bringing, whenever we can, Indigenous wisdom into the conversation. Greta, I want to do a time check with you. How are we doing?
You have 7 minutes.
Okay, great. So I just want to tell a little story then, if there's time. We had a conversation scheduled at the Foreign Ministry in fall of 2018. And we're invited. It was actually a seminar about Kauai, which is the island I live on, Russia relations, which coincidentally go back 200 years. But it happened to be happening in the week that the United States was about to announce, and the Russians knew this, that we were going to withdraw from the INF treaty. So the tone was very heavy in this meeting, and we were asked to present for about 5 minutes. And we use, and I have to say, thanks to the elders here who have shared their wisdom with me and teach me all the time, we bring in Indigenous wisdom when we can into the conversation. So I'm just going to play a message that we played. Let me see what I can do here. That day, that was a message from an Indigenous elder.
There's a tremendous need.
Let me see if I can get it. Sorry.
There's a tremendous need for everyone to be tuned in, to listen to Ho'olohe, to the rhythms of this earth. And most of all, to share aloha, to share love, aloha kikahi, love and respect one to another. That's all I ask.
So when we played that video, everything in the room changed. It had been so tense. And when we spoke, her name is Auntie Sabra Kauka, an elder here on this island. When we shared this message from her, when we shared aloha and brought really love into the room. The convener of the seminar said, I didn't know how to bring the spirit of aloha into this room, but you've just brought it in here, and everything shifted. It calmed down. The sharing became less tense. We were really, it took the conversation out of the heads exclusively and into our hearts. And so that's something that we try to do in this work that we do, is to bring in Indigenous wisdom when we can. Also, the power of music and cultural exchange. And we took Hawaii artist and activist Makana, a dear friend, on a concert tour of Russia, where he shared the spirit of aloha and his heart everywhere he went. And we had a very serious conversation again about a week or so later. And I think we had just announced our withdrawal from the INF Treaty. And the evening opened with a general, a Russian general, very concerned about this. And Makana played, and our dear colleague there, Vladimir Orlov, who is a nuclear non-proliferation and arms control expert on the Russian side, said, this is the first time we've ever had a serious dialogue on nuclear security with music playing in the halls of the Diplomatic Academy of the Foreign Ministry. And again, that music opened hearts and changed the conversation. Makana, when we were there, it was just after the article had come out, and a journalist asked if I would be recorded for an interview about the 38 minutes in a just decommissioned nuclear bomb shelter from the Cold War, not far from the Kremlin, deep underground. And I said, sure, but I said, I want to take Makana. Is it okay if we bring Makana? And he brings his guitar, because the acoustics down there, I'm sure, are going to be amazing. So can I bring him along? And he said, absolutely. So going down into this relic of the Cold War, which they'd done nothing to fix up, it was exactly left the way it was haunting. For me, I did feel kind of almost physically ill as we went down further and further, and saw where people were meant to survive in the event of a nuclear attack. And when we got down there, Makana went into this cavern, this space where you see him right here, and we were all silent and had no plan. And he started to chant a native Hawaiian chant. It just came out of him, and it was like it was reverberating. It was almost felt like an exorcism to me of what it just was very powerful. And then he started to strum his guitar a few lines of a Hawaiian song. And then he stopped. And then what we're going to see a little bit later, this song just poured through him on the spot. It was an inspiration. It was an honor to be a witness, to see this come through him. We happened to have one camera and a little sound recorder, and we were able to catch it all on film amazingly, but there was no plan to do this. It was just a gift. Back in the 1980s, we used to say, like climbers together, tethered together on one rope, we can all climb together to the summit or fall together into the abyss. Back then, I was running a youth exchange program, a citizen diplomacy initiative with Russia. And we had this idea of trying to create demonstrations of cooperation, of surviving together. And we came up with this idea to, actually it was inspired by students when I was teaching in the Soviet Union in 1980. And it took 5 years to realize this dream, because it was very hard to get Soviet American children together at that time. It was impossible, it was forbidden when we started trying to do this. But in 1985, we had the first joint ascent of Mount Elbrus, which is almost 19,000 feet in the former Caucasus, in the Caucasus Mountains of the former Soviet Union, the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. And it became an image of something that could break through. We filmed it. It was broadcast on the eve of the first Reagan-Gorbachev summit. And it was a vision for peace and cooperation. So that's the question we're asking today. And through many synchronicities, started and planted by the seed of interviewing Ivan Urgant, who's Russia's most popular late night TV host, who talked about how close we are to each other in the Bering Strait, that's where we're actually neighbors. Our border is less than 3 miles apart, that we really treat each other as neighbors. He planted that seed, and then many others synchronistically planted seeds about the Bering Strait. And then I was introduced by chance to Russians who were holding this vision of, like I was, of bringing together indigenous elders into the Bering Strait. We were going to be doing this actually this year, last year, and now this year, but now we're going to do it in 2022. And it's called Bering Strait for Peace, a gathering of indigenous peoples in small boats in the middle of the Bering Strait, where we are neighbors with a very less than 3 miles apart where our border is, and where families are artificially separated who used to travel together to see each other on both sides of the strait. Members of the same tribe live on each side of the border right now, and where we're going to share culture, ceremony, music, dance, and also launch a project for joint climate change monitoring and marine conservation monitoring on both sides of the strait. So, you know, when we started the work during the Cold War, everybody said that the Soviet Union would never change. They would always be our enemy. The Berlin Wall would never come down, that we would most likely, almost surely blow each other up, and that really trying to do anything was impossible, that it was just a waste of time. That's sort of the narrative that I got from most people, those of us doing this work. But we have lived to see the world change, those of us who have been around that long. We live to see the impossible become possible. And I truly believe in my heart and soul that if we did it back then, we can do it again today. It's very different today than it was back then, but it's up to each and every one of us and all of you. And thank you for all you're doing to make this happen. And I always like to end often these conversations with my favorite quote from Nelson Mandela, that it always seems impossible until it's done. So just as the impossible happened, seemingly impossible in South Africa and in US-Soviet relations and so many other places of conflict and war, may it be so today between the United States and Russia and all nuclear armed states. And may we build together a world without nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Cynthia. So now we have about 20 minutes for Q&A and discussion. If you're calling in on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. If you're on Zoom on your device, you can hit reactions and then raise your Zoom hand. Or you can also just put questions right in the chat box and we can read it from there. Let's see. Maud, you can now unmute. Oh, I think that was a clapping, not a raising hand.
I didn't seem to have a raised hand, but I did have a clap, which is a way to thank Greta too, I guess. If Women Against War does lots of lobbying, and I like the suggestion of sharing the nuclear playbook with our legislators, but I'm also wondering whether you can suggest, among these many things that the US should do, what's the most strategic policy change to focus in on if we were asking a legislator or we were writing a letter to Biden? What's the next thing that we want the US to do in this process?
Thank you, Maud, for that question. You know, I think that I did mention no first use as something that I think is really important. And one of the reasons that I think it's important is because, you know, Obama wanted to do it. He got dissuaded by the people in his cabinet and defense minister, et cetera. He got dissuaded, but there's a lot of support for this in like by Secretary Perry, and Biden at one point has been heard to say that he in principle supports the idea of no first use. So my Russian colleague, Vladimir Orlov, in my interview with him said, you know, we just need one success story. So I say, let's go where we know we can do something that really is going to make a difference. It's going to reduce tensions. It's going to reduce the likelihood of conflict. If we can say that we're not going to be first to use nuclear weapons, imagine what that's going to do for Kim Jong-un. Imagine what that's going to do for someone in Russia who is concerned about the possibility, as our rhetoric has gone up about lowering the threshold for nuclear use by using low yield nuclear weapons on both sides. This is something that really, I think, could start, it could be the first step. So I would say, and there's legislation pending for this, which is if you go to the nuclear playbook and you click on more, you will see the status of that legislation. So that would be, I would say, and because I want to do a shout out to my colleagues at Beyond the Bomb, who have a whole campaign for no first use that is wonderful if you want to engage with them on it. And Global Zero also has, and their sister organizations, they also have a lot of information, and I've put those links in the chat or to Greta on why no first use. And we have more information on the website. But imagine if every nuclear armed state says they're not going to use nuclear weapons first and declares that as a policy. Now they have to hold to it, but we've not been willing to make that a policy. So how does that make other people feel, whether they're nuclear armed or not? So I think it could be game changing in the first success story. Now we have one, let's go to the next one. We need to eliminate launch on warning, taking our missiles off of hair trigger alert. That is where the greatest risk of an accidental nuclear war is, because of a nuclear false alarm. Our intercontinental ballistic missiles are sitting ducks. They actually need to be eliminated. And Secretary Perry and Tom Kalina, a nuclear policy expert with Plowshares, have come out with a book recently called The Button. I urge you all to read it. It really talks about what we need to do and why. And so it includes eliminating ICBMs. And that's increasingly looked at as something that should be done. Now, we have an entire opposition to eliminating ICBMs, particularly among those states where ICBMs are located. So that's another level of the conversation. But the playbook goes through a number of steps that that show where we have legislation. But I would begin with no first use, mainly because I think it's where we can have the first success story, and because it's going to reduce tensions.
Thanks, Cynthia. And I tried to put almost all of the links in the chat, but we will also share those afterwards in an email.
I know there were a lot of them. Sorry.
And I do see one question from Wendy in the chat. Is Citizens Climate Lobby involved in this?
I know of Citizens Climate Lobby. I don't know if they're involved on the nuclear issue, but I will say that it's a really, really wonderful and important question, because I think that unlike in the 1980s, today, especially the young ones are making connecting the dots between nuclear weapons and all other issues. We have to get out of our silos, no pun intended, and really see how this is all intersectional. You know, when you look at nuclear weapons spending, we have the data from 2019 of $73 billion, with the US spending over 35 billion, half of that amount. And you look at people saying we don't have enough money to deal with the pandemic or climate change, addressing these other problems. We have the money. And the Pentagon budget, 740 billion. You know, we have the money. We just have to shift the priorities and compel our political leaders to make those changes. And so, you know, some of my colleagues say in the field, and you have to remember, there is also another intersection with climate, which is probably obvious to most of you, but, you know, nuclear winter will change the climate. A nuclear exchange at the level that I mentioned that would trigger nuclear winter will change that's a matter of minutes for a nuclear exchange that's going to change the climate. And we still have some more time with climate change. So climate, there is such a high carbon footprint of war. War causes such a high carbon footprint. So it's all connected. It's the same thing with systemic racism. You know, nuclear weapons have been used, largely tested, stored, the waste, on Indigenous peoples and people of color. So it's what we call in the field radioactive racism. So when we transform our nuclear legacy, which involves changing policy, which involves all of these other things. But to really transform the legacy, we've got to deal with, first of all, the weapons to keep ourselves here and eliminating them. And then we've got to deal with the legacy of what's happened in the nuclear age, and we have to provide compensation to victims. These are crimes against humanity that have been committed over and over and over again, and are still being committed today in indigenous communities, like around for the Tewa people who live adjacent to Los Alamos. Their land was misappropriated and taken away from them to build that nuclear weapons complex, and they live next door. And there's still, if you go, there's so much harm being done now with still today with waste, etc., production.
Thank you. Any other questions? Don't be shy. I'm also looking at gallery view. So there we go, Karen. I see you can also physically raise your hand and wave it around and I'll try to see you. Karen, you can now unmute. You have to unmute.
Actually, Greta, it's Pat Beto. She's using Karen's, but it's Pat.
Okay, Pat, with the screen name Karen. We still can't hear you. I've asked you to unmute. You just have to click the button to accept and unmute yourself.
There she is.
Perfect. Oh, we got you almost. Try again. Sorry. While you're trying to do that, I do see a comment that you might want to respond to, Cynthia, in the chat from Wendy, who says, high rates of thyroid cancer in their area from fallout from testing many years ago.
Wendy, thank you for bringing this forward. I had in the third session of Women Transforming Our Legacy, a woman named Mary Dixon, who is a downwinder living close. She's from Utah, and she shared with us something called Miller's Map. I don't know if you've seen it, but it shows that every county in the United States, there is not one county that was left untouched because of the winds blowing from nuclear testing that happened during the era of nuclear testing. And the thyroid cancer rates are staggering. We don't even know the extent that everybody's been impacted, but I encourage you all to look at Miller's Map, because I didn't know about it until Mary brought it forward. And you can actually see that under the events page on our website. You can go and watch that session. She speaks very, very powerfully about this. Thank you.
Karen or Pat, go ahead.
I was struck by the chart with the numbers of nuclear weapons of China and Russia and the United States, and seeing how many more we have than either of them, this 390 number, I think it was. And if we start moving down so that we get, somewhere near where the others are, that would take thousands of nuclear weapons of ours off the charts. And I don't know, I've never heard about any, sort of move in that direction, but it was stark to see the number of the smaller ones, and then us with our thousands and thousands of them. Are people understanding what I'm saying here?
Yes, yes.
Yes, absolutely, Karen. And I'm really grateful that you've raised this, because it's really where we need to go to eliminate nuclear weapons. And I use the word a little bit interchangeably, but that's actually the number of warheads. And so,
Okay.
and it is, China has 320, and the US and Russia, I think together have an estimated 12,175. And China has said, we're not going to play until you come down to our level, which is what I mentioned in the China is our enemy campaign conversation, and is not our enemy campaign. And Global Zero, there was a great, the founder of Global Zero, Dr. Bruce Blair, who sadly just passed away, was a former Minuteman launch code officer who, seeing up close and personal what the dangers were, became a great advocate for the abolition of nuclear weapons and founded Global Zero. And he was a brilliant man. And he and two women colleagues, Emma Claire Foley and Jessica Slate, together came out with something called the Alternate Nuclear Posture Review. And that's also on the plate. Global Zero is in the links that I've given to you. But they have come up with the most sound, verifiable pathway to get to zero nuclear weapons, which takes the United States and Russia down in staged reductions to 300, which is about the level of China. They're at 320. And once we get there, then we can really have conversations about getting to zero. And I just want to go back to what Maud said earlier and asking about what would be strategic. At the same time that we do things like no first use, I would say we have to get involved in divestment from nuclear weapons to promote the treaty. We have to do, I advocate arms control, traditional arms control, nuclear risk reduction, and abolition. And we all can't do maybe everything all at once, but I support all of it, because anything that's going to reduce the nuclear risk and is going to make a difference to get things back on track. We are in this new arms race and we're headed towards an abyss. So even though arms control may be very limited in the numbers at this point, it's a success story. It builds trust. It reduces tensions. We have to work on it all at once. So I personally work on nuclear risk reduction and abolition, and I support arms control.
Dorothy, you can now unmute. Dorothy, you need to unmute. Dorothy, do you see the invite to unmute?
I see a question in the chat, Greta.
Okay, why don't you go ahead with that, and Dorothy, unmute yourself whenever you're able to.
So the question is from Terry. Thank you. How does the U.S. justify spending more on nuclear missiles, or on more nuclear missiles? That's a really deep question, and thank you for it. You know, that article that I referenced in the bulletin that came out this week addresses this issue somewhat. There is such a strong military industrial complex lobby that has such an impact on elected representatives. And so I think that is a big part of the reason why there's the justification. It's the military industrial complex, the people who are profiting from these weapon systems. And, you know, in the States, where I mentioned places like where the ICBMs are located, the argument is that this provides jobs. So we have to really come up with a plan for conversion. You know, we used to talk about conversion all the time, way back when I was in my 20s. And so this is about, we need to talk about conversion, and we need to have a plan. And there are the sort of, you know, the Green New Deal. You know, we need to show that sustainability in these places and working on things that are life affirming is going to provide plenty of jobs. And And we need to demonstrate that, and we need to start giving people we need to start creating those jobs for people. And so that's where that is going to make a difference. And that's why this divestment that I keep talking about is so important. It's been what's made a difference before. So in all these other campaigns. So, and I also feel like we need to call out our elected representatives who are supporting the military industrial complex. You know, they had an opportunity to reduce our Pentagon budget by 10%, our elected representatives last summer in the midst of a pandemic. And Democrats and Republicans came together and voted against that.
Thanks. Dorothy, I see you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Yes, my name is Dot. The point I want to make is that I, in a way, think I'm a peace activist, Grannies for Peace, vigiling every week. And yet, I want to say that this was startling. I'm so glad to have this information. My eyes are opened. We don't know what we don't know. And that's the way I feel. We have to get what I am seeing today out there. That is the big thing. I'm not the only one. I'm far from the only one. There's billions around the world that don't know. And I know you've made that point, but I just want to say that I'm one of them. And it is alarming to me that I knew so little.
Dot, I just want to say thank you, because I was sleepwalking too. With all that I had done during the Cold War, what you just said, you don't know what you don't know. And until I sat with Gorbachev and Secretary Perry and all those experts, I didn't know. I didn't know.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we are almost out of time. I see person with the phone number 520 ending in 122. You can now unmute. Here you go.
Hi, I'm in North Carolina. Speaking of conversion, since the Congress is so broad in we have to assume they're not going to do anything really. I mean, yeah, keep trying, but is there any link ups to Grumman and those kinds of, like, some kind of communication line that is already started? Any nonprofits that might be already asking for communication with them for conversion plans, et cetera, because our representatives don't represent us? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. The article that I mentioned in the bulletin is focused on Grumman. And one of the things that was really illuminating for me in reading the article, which I encourage you, it's a long read, but I encourage you all to read, was that the chairman or CEO is a woman who runs that company now, and she pivoted to work on defense and for that company after 9/11 because she believes that it's going to protect her son. So she's coming into this thinking that this is going to make the world safer. At least that's what comes across in the article. And so what you just said, I think that, you know, all the difficult conversations and divisions that we need to have right now in our country, we need to be having these conversations. You know, I, as a mother who have a completely different perspective, would love to be in that conversation with her. So that seed was planted as I read the article this week. I don't know of any that are happening right now, but this is where mediation, this is where that can play a role, where we look at where our shared interests are and we begin to try to change the conversation. And we need to compel our elected representatives. Right now, they are the ones endowed with making nuclear policy. And I know that they're not doing what they need to be doing, but there are elected representatives who are championing transforming our nuclear policy. And there are links in the nuclear playbook to legislation that some of those representatives are and senators and Congress people are working on. So it's a really flawed situation that we're in, but we have to work with what we have while we have it.
Thank you, Cynthia. And now, Doreen, we'll go back to you for some closing words, and then we'll conclude with the music video.
Thanks, Greta. Well, if we were all together in one place, physically, we would all stand up and give a huge round of applause, a stand up applause to both Greta and to Cynthia, but we're not. So let's just all applaud in whatever way we can. We are deeply, deeply grateful to you both, Greta and Cynthia, for the wisdom that you have shared with us, the information, but also, the push to do something. So thank you, everyone who has participated this afternoon. It's our hope, Women Against War, Grannies for Peace, it's our hope that we will commit ourselves to praying, to studying, to acting, and pushing for policies that are going to push us toward a world that is free of nuclear warheads. So once again, thank you, everyone. We're going to leave you this afternoon with the haunting music, the music video that Cynthia referenced, born from the artist Mancada. Am I saying it right, Cynthia?
Makana.
His experience of being in a nuclear bunker deep under Moscow. And Cynthia has mentioned that. So we're going to end our program with that, and we will not have any closing remarks. Greta will simply end the program. She'll end the Zoom. So let's open our hearts. Let's listen to this music with the hope that it will move us to act.
I'm on the ground, what a sound all around. How did I get down here so low? Where did all the people go? In my mind, I don't know if it's real. When I think what could happen, why they built this, why it came to be, why we build places like this with our mind. With our but it's just a container, and it's up to us
It's a time machine to a place I hope never materializes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Greta, everyone.
Bye-bye.